Welcome into Eye on Northeast Kansas, the podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. This is where we recap some of the top interviews we've shared with you on 13 News Eye on Northeast Kansas, our TV show. It comes to you live, 4 o'clock Central Time, Monday through Friday, from the WIBW studios in Topeka, the capital of the great state of Kansas. We had a visit this week with Governor Laura Kelly. We are winding down 2023, looking ahead to 2024. This is the time of year when we start hearing rumblings about what the governor's budget proposal might look like, what proposals lawmakers might have for her and she for them, and how they're all going to work together. We've already been hearing a lot. The governor's been on a tour touting her proposal to expand Medicaid. That is something that's been a priority of hers since she took office, and it's something that just has stalled when it comes to the legislature. She has a new proposal out that has included some concessions. GOP leadership says, you know what, that's really not good enough. We don't think it's going to fly. So the governor is taking a little bit of a different approach. We talked about that. We talked about the projected budget surplus. We talked about the Department for Children and Families. She also talked about business expansion and what priorities she has that's been flowing a bit under the radar. Here is our conversation with Kansas Governor Laura Kelly. Start with the obvious one. Medicaid expansion remains your top priority. You've made some concessions. Republican leadership says they're still not good enough. How do you plan to make progress on this issue when the leadership hasn't changed? It's the same thing.
Well, I understand that. And, they've been moving the goalpost for 5 years now. This is the 6th year that they're intending to move the goalpost. And we anticipated that. So we have taken a very different tact in the way that we've actually been out campaigning for Medicaid expansion so that when legislators come back into session, they will have heard from their constituents, and hopefully will continue to hear from their constituents during the legislative session how important Medicaid expansion is to the state of Kansas, and that hearing from those constituents will create a groundswell of support from the rank and file legislators to pressure the legislative leadership to allow them to debate and vote on Medicaid expansion. I believe if they're allowed to debate and vote, it will pass.
Some of the concessions you've made that the leadership has said aren't good enough. They doubt that the work requirement would pass muster with federal courts. But also I'm interested in hearing why you think that the hospital fee would be a good approach. Hospitals already say that they're not getting enough reimbursement for the care they provide, and now you're wanting them to pay, to have more people pay? Or is this a matter of at least they'd be getting something rather than nothing?
Well, this was a voluntary concession on the part of the hospitals. We didn't just put that in there without, having conversations with them. They want us to do that, to ensure that Medicaid expansion happens, because, it's pennies on the dollar that they'd be spending for the money that we'd get back. It's like the $7 billion we've already left in Washington, D.C., Kansas taxpayer dollars that should have been going into our healthcare system over the past 10 years. It hasn't happened. The hospitals are willing to partner with us to ensure that forevermore those federal dollars come back and support our healthcare system, particularly in our rural health hospitals.
You're crafting the budget proposal right now. We're projected to have a surplus in the budget, a surplus that's predicted to grow. Of course, that could go either way. No one can perfectly foresee the future. It's kind of a good problem to have, but at the same time, it kind of creates more problems. So there's going to be debate over that pot of money. Where do you stand on how it should be spent? Should we do it on one-time expenditures, or do we invest some in expenditures that might have to be sustained? For example, increase K-12 funding, increase university funding.
I think we do both. We do a lot of one-time expenditures. That would be including paying down debt. We've been doing a lot of that over the past couple of years, and we'll continue to pay down debt. And then we'll also pay cash for projects that we ordinarily would have bonded and incurred debt for going forward. So a lot of the funding should be set aside for that, because a lot of it is one-time money. It's not ongoing revenues that will be coming in year after year after year. A lot of it is really left over from the pandemic. So we'll do that, but then there's also enough ongoing revenue because of all of the economic development that we've done over the past 5 years that we have the money in there to provide tax relief to Kansans. We had it last year, and I presented a proposal for a pretty comprehensive tax cut program. Legislature objected to it and didn't pass it. I also suggested that for some of that one-time money, that if you don't want to do tax cuts, sort of a systemic tax cut, then let's give people back some cash. And we proposed, I think it was $450 for a single filer and $900 last year for married filing jointly to go back. The legislature rejected that too.
Let's talk about economic development. The Apex bill is set to sunset. Will you seek to advance another proposal like that, the mega enhancements, the mega incentive projects?
We actually had a proposal in last legislative session that would have modified some of our incentive programs or added to our incentive programs. I think we're going to work to get that passed this year. It sort of came up a little too late last year. Whether it will look, well, it does not look like the APEX program. The APEX program is specifically designed for those over $1 billion capital investment projects. I think the proposal that we had last year would allow us to continue to go after mega projects like that, but it also could be used for things that would not qualify for APEX.
What is the status of that second APEX project, the Integra facility in Wichita? First, they were having some issues getting their CHIPS funding. We're also hearing there might be some issues with getting them an adequate water supply. What's the status?
The status on that is we're waiting to hear about the federal funding. The CHIP money has to come in which case they would then get the APEX money.
Is there a water situation?
Not that I know of, but that doesn't mean there's not. I just have not been informed.
DCF. It's been a topic of discussion in the past, and certainly in October it came back into the forefront with the killing of Zoe Felix in Topeka. What proposals are you going to advance to strengthen the protections for children?
Well, we have done a whole lot in the 5 years that we've been in office. Before I got into office, just before I got into office, I served on the Child Welfare Task Force in the Senate. And it was very clear from that that there were massive problems in our Department of Children and Families, particularly in our foster care system. So during my tenure and Secretary Howard's tenure, we have invested a lot of money and had some very professional, knowledgeable people putting in place programs that are keeping kids out of foster care. We have at least 1,000 fewer kids in foster care now than we did when we took office. Last year, I think there were 3,000 kids placed. That's the fewest in any year, maybe ever. So we've done a lot to keep kids out of the foster care system, doing a lot that when it's time for them to come out and go back to their biological family or into an adoptive family, that we have programs in place that follow them rather than just cutting them off and sending them on their way. In terms of the Zoe Felix case in particular, I think what we've uncovered from that is that there were some serious communication issues. There's more than one agency that deals with families like this, and there was clearly a gap in the communication that proved to be a real problem. So we are really looking to ways to improve that process so that that kind of information sharing, vital, critical information sharing happens in a timely manner.
What about strengthening the investigations, though? Because it would seem part of the thing was the investigator's report was, well, I went and nobody was home. I went and nobody was home. Our reporters went out there and within minutes found a neighbor who said, yeah, she's sleeping over there in a homeless camp. Should there be some requirement that somebody follows up with neighbors or tries to physically lay eyes on a child instead of saying, well, we tried and nobody was home?
Yeah, and I hear you, and those are the kind of conversations that we're having over in DCF when we're looking at all of the policies and procedures and processes that are in place. We want these kids to be safe. We want them to be able to live, grow up, and have good lives. So we're doing what we can. It is a child welfare system. I expect there will always be problems, and I think that will happen. It's how you respond. Do you do anything to make it better? And we're doing things.
Cybersecurity, another security issue. Obviously, we have had a huge problem with the state court security system. Ardent, the parent company of St. Francis Hospital in Topeka, was hit recently. This obviously puts it in the forefront, but we don't have a lot of information on it. And I understand there's an investigation going on, but a huge question for Kansas is, absent any information, nobody will even tell them if their personal information was compromised. Was personal information compromised?
Well, this did not happen in the executive branch. And so I think questions about what got out, what didn't get out, what's happening with that investigation, probably those questions ought to be directed to the Office of Judicial Administration because they have the information.
Could you compel that information? Should Kansans know if their personal information was compromised?
Could I compel it?
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know if I can do that. It's a separate branch of government.
What does this teach us about the state cybersecurity situation overall?
Well, I wouldn't say it really taught us anything new. We know that there are issues, and we actually have been focusing like a laser on those issues through our information technology office, been investing a fair amount of money. Some of this one-time money that you're talking about, or that we were talking about a little earlier, we've been investing in upgrading our information systems so that they are more secure. We recognize that it's a huge problem and one that we're addressing.
And I know our time is running short, but give me a hint. One topic, one priority, maybe that people, that's not the headline, that's not the Medicaid expansion, it's not education, that you want to see happen this session that you'll be touching on and proposing.
One issue that I didn't talk at all about really during my first term was the water issue. And since my second term, actually since the campaign for my second term, water has really moved way up on my priority list. And I've created a subcabinet of all of the entities that within the state system that deal with water so that they can start acting as one agency rather than siloed 9 or 10 different agencies so that we can take a really comprehensive look at the water issue and make a strategic plan to do what we can do to stabilize our water system, make the quality and the quantity sufficient to get us through for generations to come. It's absolutely imperative for our economy.
And it is hard to get people to think about that because they think it's something that's a couple centuries down the road. But I remember, I think about 10 years ago or so, during the Brownback administration, the first vision plan came out and it said, if nothing is done, in 50 years, we won't have an adequate water supply. And I thought, that's my lifetime. How do you make people see this is an investment we need to make? It's not an option.
Well, I think, it's become a lot more obvious to people in the past few years, just with the information coming out of how dire the situation is with the Ogallala, for example, in certain parts of southwest Kansas. So I think there's more attention. I think there are, though, a lot of complicated legal and political issues that have to be worked through, and the only way you can do that is to bring those people around the table and have them recognize what the issues are from all of the perspectives. That it's not just irrigators who have issues; it's also municipalities, and so having them hear and recognize that we're all in this together. We cannot resolve this problem unless everybody is working together on this. And then we've got to invest a ton of money, and we've started that. Just last year I signed a bill that will allocate an additional $35 million every year for the next 5 years to deal with the water issues. And then from this subcabinet and others that are working, as they come up with plans, we will look again. Some of that one-time money might be able to be directed towards water issues.
And make sure the Bank of KDOT doesn't turn into the Bank of the Water Office.
I assure you that under my watch, that will not happen. I am absolutely committed to KDOT having the bank closed forever and for them to get the promised revenues. We've done that now. I think when we closed the Bank of KDOT in fiscal year 23, it remains closed, and we've actually been looking and have done all sorts of things to take money that was embedded in the KDOT budget and shouldn't have been, to put that back into the appropriate agency so that there's even more money for KDOT.
Lawmakers return to session in January, and next week on Eye on Northeast Kansas, we are scheduled to have House Speaker Dan Hawkins visit us, so we'll hear his take on these issues that we talked about with Governor Kelly. As we mentioned, we are looking ahead to 2024, so on one of our final Eye on Northeast Kansas episodes of the year, I invited Shawnee County Emergency Management Director Dusty Nichols in for a chat. He had some advice on some preparedness resolutions we might be able to make in the year ahead. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
And you watch the forecast very intently because one of the things you worry about is winter weather.
Yeah, there's always winter weather. I mean, it's Kansas.
Winter, yeah.
There's spring weather and summer weather. We get it all. But
right.
yeah, preparing for winter weather this time of year is just kind of common sense.
So when you think about preparedness, especially as we enter the new year, what is like top of mind, number one thing we need to do and know?
That's a really difficult question because different families are in different situations. So for me, starting with the end in mind, where do I want to be? Where's that goal? Do I want to have a communications plan, or am I got the plan and now I'm looking for a kit? So trying to figure out that gap of where you're at is really probably the first thing you should do.
What do we have to keep in mind when it comes to communications? It's important.
Sure. I would say the number one thing is don't count on any form of communication as the only way. So have multiple versions or multiple ways to get a warning, whether it's a weather radio or a regular radio, listening local, whether it's TV, handheld, whatever, your phone. But having the battery backup, having those power things, those power sources ready to go as well.
What about communicating with our families?
Have that plan in place. So if something happens, there's an automatic trigger. If I can't get a hold of you by 6 o'clock p.m., then you need to go here. Having those things set up and having those safe places ready to go and having backups. So the communication plan is really, really important, but also having backup plans in safe places to go, especially for kids.
So you said communication was one thing, and then what was the second half?
Oh, if you want to build a kit. So
building a kit.
Building a kit.
I guess there's probably more than one situation we need a kit for.
Sure, there's the summer kit and the winter kit, and the
car kit, and the house kit,
and the house kit, and all
the
those
storm
things.
shelter kit.
So where do you plan to be at this time of year? If you're most of the time at home, or if you're in the car or work, those are the three general places where people generally are. That's where you live your life. So having those kits and being prepared for traveling, your car kit, as you said. Do you have a snow shovel? Do you have ice melt? Do you have those things in your car ready to go? And then at home, do you have backup power? Do you have a generator? If not, do you have medications? And do you have medications that you have to keep cool? Sometimes you can just put them outside if it's cold enough. So think
I grew
those
up in Wisconsin,
things.
yes. We just put things outside a lot.
Sure, just think those things through. So that's really part of it's the plan and the kit together. What do you need? And if you have certain restrictions for those or certain things that need to happen, you need to think them through.
What situations does this apply to? Because like we mentioned weather, but that's just one thing.
Sure, it kind of goes back to making a preparedness resolution. What do you plan to do this year, having that end goal in mind? So if you don't have a kit, maybe, once a paycheck, go to the dollar store and buy those warming things or something like that and put them in your kit a little bit at a time and build your kit up. The other thing is taking a CPR class. Hunt up on Google search or whatever and see who's teaching CPR locally, or first aid classes, or stop the bleed classes.
I was just going to say, and the stop the bleed
classes.
Are
fantastic, yeah. Find out where those are and take those classes. And that's kind of have that end goal in mind. I'm going to be more prepared by the end of the year. So you have your goal, you have your time frame, and you have the path to get there. So thinking with the end in mind.
We talk about this with our financial planning guest a lot, that you can't just do it and forget it. Right. So how does that apply when it comes to emergency preparedness?
Interesting you say that. So we talked about building a plan. Mm-hmm. Every year you should review that plan, because if you do have, you had your communications plan and your kids know to go to 2 houses down, well, they may have moved. So now all those things were in your plan, are they still valid? So you have to validate that plan yearly. So if you do that in January, you pick a certain day of the year. September is usually National Preparedness Month, so we push it then, but everybody has their own time frame. So,
and what things in your kit can maybe go bad as well that you would not need to
Exactly. If you have a first aid kit that has certain ointments or something, and they may not be as strong, if they're in there for 2-3 years or something like that. So there's those kinds of things, and then any kind of medications that can go bad. But there's the limits on batteries and all those kinds of things that might be in your plan, in your kit. Yeah, you got to check them at least once a year.
And keep the batteries charged.
Yes.
I've been guilty of that lately, letting the battery kind of get down below that 10%.
When it happens to me is I get a new phone and I don't put the spare cord in there. So I have a new cord. So
even the emergency preparedness manager, folks.
Learn from me, folks.
Has his moments. Dusty, thank you so very much, and we look forward to continuing to visit with you in the year ahead. Your resolution should be to come visit us regularly.
I will do.
All right.
And be safe, everyone.
Thank you. We hope you have a safe and happy new year as well. And keep visiting us on ION Northeast Kansas. Remember, if you would like to see the videos from these guests or any of the guests that you see on our show, you can go to WIBW.com. We have them all posted there. I also share them on my Facebook page, which is WIBW Melissa Bruner. And all of the ION Northeast Kansas segments are on our YouTube channel. Just head to YouTube, search WIBW 13 News. Be sure to click subscribe while you're there. Until next time and next year, we'll see you on the Red Couch.